Good morning. We'll call the meeting to order, please. I'm going to acknowledge Commissioner McDonald on the phone, I think. Okay.
Yes,
she's
I'm
joining us.
here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just a note that our agenda for today has been revised. A COVID-19 update was added as a general discussion item. I'd also like to note agenda item 5 has a typo. On page 3, the correct figure for High Point Construction Services alternate number 2 and number 5 is $324,270.04. Welcome to the new employees in the audience and to all of you who've joined us today to our commission meeting. I'll call for a motion and second for approval of the minutes of the regular commission meeting of February 12th, 2020.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Curtis, if you could give us the executive director's report, please.
Indeed. Good morning, commissioners. Good morning, guests. Very nice to see everyone here this morning. For just a brief moment, I'd like to point back up to the screen where the safety champions were just rotating. Again, 4 port employees highlighted for their work on watching out for each other, watching out for passengers, trying to make their work as safe as possible. Appreciate all of what they do for the port. Also want to welcome our new port employees. We just met with a number of them this morning. I got to sit down with them last week, talk about what brought them here, talk about what we do. It's a terrific group, really interesting, diverse bunch of employees. So really excited to have them here as part of the port family. Really just one note today to share, and we'll get into it more around COVID-19. I've asked 2 of the executive team members to talk with us at a little more length about what's been happening. For context, we're approaching COVID-19 in really 2 areas. One is a large employer, our 800 or so employees, and what we're doing to address concerns about their safety and well-being and business continuity for the port as a whole. And secondarily, around operations and what we're doing to keep the airport functioning, keep our facilities and marine industrial properties functioning, and folks who work in those properties, business partners and employees safe. So we'll get to that in just a minute. I would just like to urge everyone to continue to remember sort of the rules. You'll note port employees trying to not shake hands, and social distancing is a pretty strange phrase to use, but we are trying to figure out how to avoid risk and be as safe as possible. At the same time, here we sit in a room with 150 or 160 people, right? We're going to try to keep doing everything that we do, but also be sensitive to risk. And so I would just ask all of us to keep doing the things like basic hygiene. And if you're sick, I'm sure we'll be talking about this more here in the next couple items, but we're asking people to stay home, and we're working with employers on that as well to keep essentially people who think they might be at risk of having flu-like symptoms out of the workplace. So more on that shortly. That, Madam President, are my comments this morning.
Thank you, Curtis. I'll call for a motion and second for approval of the executive director's report. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. I'll open the public comment period. I have a number of people signed up. I'm not sure if there are others signed up in the back. I'll just start with the list. Maggie Long, please, and then Ben Dines. Thank you, Dines.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Maggie Long. I'm the Executive Director for the Service Employees International Union, Local 49. SEIU Local 49 is an over 15,000 member union comprised of healthcare and property service workers, including over 600 wheelchair operators, baggage handlers, janitors, and cabin cleaners. These workers are of numerous and varied races, ethnicities, countries of origin, religion, and gender identities, united by pride in the work they do for our airport. First in 2015 and then in 2019, the port took small steps to improve working conditions for airline subcontracted workers, including a half measure to require $15 an hour for wheelchair workers. Our mission as a union is to improve the quality of life for our members, their families, and dependents by striving to create a more just society. In service of that mission, we engaged with the port for many years on raising standards for airport passenger service workers. Today, I'm here with PDX workers demanding an end to half measures and empty promises. All workers at PDX, regardless of race, class, sex, or job classification, must have access to a set of basic rights on the job. The Airport Worker Bill of Rights, a concept we're introducing today, calls on the port to ensure that all PDX workers have three things. 1, access to affordable, high-quality health insurance. 2, a fair wage, and adequate paid time off to recover from illness or to be with family. The port's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion requires concrete actions. The port's stated commitment to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion is laudable. But to truly advance this equitable vision, the port needs to take action to ensure that all workers at the port have access to good jobs. The port seems to be solely focused on its own employees while missing the incredible opportunity it has to pass policy that can impact the close to 10,000 workers who come to work every day at PDX. Maintaining this narrow equity focus on only the port's direct employees and contractors ignores the wide impact that the port has on standards at all levels of subcontracting. Women and workers of color disproportionately fill the jobs at PDX that pay the lowest wages and offer the fewest benefits, further undermining the port's credibility as a regional equity leader. Raising wage and benefit standards for these positions is a crucial way for the port to demonstrate its value and move closer toward achieving its vision of prosperity for all. All airport workers deserve a living wage, affordable health care, and paid time off. Wheelchair operators came together to form their union 7 years ago and collectively succeeded in raising their wages to $15 an hour, a standard set by the port for this group only. This was a vast improvement from the poverty wages they had earned previously, but this improvement didn't go far enough. The port's regulation provides for $15 an hour, but there was no provision for subsequent increases to keep up with the costs of living. This regulation also left out all other job classifications at PDX, including baggage agents who work for the same company as wheelchair workers. The Airport Workers Bill of Rights calls on the port to raise wages to $15 for classifications beyond just wheelchair workers and adjust the wage annually to keep up with the cost of living. Higher wages are important, but they're not the only priority for airport workers. Now more than ever, with the emerging threat from COVID-19, airport workers are on the front lines of the critical convergence of public health and safety. Yet 70% of wheelchair workers surveyed last month declined their employer's health insurance, largely because it was unaffordable. Without insurance, employees cannot always afford to go to a doctor when they are sick, putting these workers and airport passengers at risk. Compounding the threat to worker and passengers' health is the limited access that workers have to paid time off. In general, airport service workers rarely have paid time off other than the minimal paid sick time mandated by the state, which is 5 days per year. Often, and in most cases, this is the only paid leave that employees have. So it's their sick time, it's their vacation time, their holiday time, all just 5 days in total. Such limited paid time off leaves many airport workers with no choice but to come to work when sick or risk falling behind on their rent or bills. The port can address these problems by adopting the Airport Worker Bill of Rights to raise standards and improve the lives of airport service workers. Recent financial records show the port's finances are robust, earning over $120 million in net revenue in 2018 and handing out a bonus to Curtis Robinhold in 2017, an amount that should be noted that was greater than the wages that passenger service workers earned in an entire year. The port has sufficient resources to adopt the Airport Worker Bill of Rights, and it must exhibit bold leadership. The Port of Portland needs to hold airlines accountable and ensure that everyone who works at this world-class airport has a living wage, affordable health insurance, and access to paid time off. Many airports throughout the country have adopted these higher standards for their service workers, leading to improved operations, safety, and security for airport passengers. In fact, Los Angeles, San Jose, Oakland have all passed these policies. Wheelchair operators, baggage handlers, cabin cleaners, and janitors represent the best of our community and are a key component in making Portland's airport the best in the country. Today, We are calling on the Port of Portland to step off the sideline and demonstrate leadership for Portland, for PDX workers, and for the region by adopting the Airport Worker Bill of Rights.
My name is Benjamin Dinas. I am a passenger services agent for Bags Inc., which means that I push passengers who require wheelchair assistance to and from their flights at PDX. I'm here asking that the port take action to level the playing field and ensure all workers at PDX have good jobs. Even while making a $15 minimum wage at PDX, working for Huntley, my previous company, I relied on tips to make ends meet. Since moving to Bags, the amount I earn in tips has been cut in half as we get substantially fewer customers in the QX gates. This has meant that I have had to rely on assistance from my family members since transitioning to Bags. It's hard to ask for support from family, and even when they can provide it, it is by no means a long-term solution. Family help has been a great support, but the amount they can send me each month has been steadily declining, and I am reliant on this money to pay rent despite living in public housing and paying some of the cheapest rent in the city. I have had to delay or even skip visits to the doctor and mental health professionals. I just cannot afford medical appointments without insurance, nor can I afford the deductible and the premium of the insurance plan offered to us by Bags. The Bags insurance plan costs $100 a month and still has a $1,250 deductible. Many of my co-workers have also been forced to come into work despite being visibly ill because if we take too many sick days, it can count against us, meaning we might be the first to go in case of layoffs. I hope that we can agree that if you work for the nation's best airport, you should be able to visit the doctor when you need to. I can't. Like working at PDX, I can see perfectly why it is consistently rated as the best airport in the country. My coworkers and I strive to make this place as perfect as possible and to deliver to the passengers as best an experience as we're capable of giving them. This is why I'm here today, to let you know that there are serious problems, and this is why my coworkers and I have formed our union. We ask that you consider this situation and help us ensure that we are able to have good jobs at PDX. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dinas. Gladys Hernandez?
Right here. Good morning, Commissioner. My name is Gladys Hernandez, and I worked as a PSA for wheelchair assistant for Hanley USA for over 12 years, and I make $15 per hour. As you know, airport workers have been organizing with SEIU Local 49. Bags and G2 have joined our union, and we are preparing to negotiate with next contract with our employers. We want to be paid fair wage so we and our family can get by without struggling without every week. And we want the airlines and the companies we work for to respect the work we do and bargain with us fairly. We know that our budgets are set by the airlines and are willing to pay based on that. Some of my coworkers work 2 or 3 jobs. They do not do this because they want to. They do it because they do not make enough money working at PDX to survive. After working a full day, they should be home relaxing, helping with homework, taking care of themselves, and getting ready for the next day. Instead, they are working their second job so they can afford their rent and put food on the table. Many of my coworkers are forced to use the state health insurance plan or food assistance program. This is not right. We work very hard here, and we are asking for fair wage for the work we do. For myself, I cannot afford to pay for health insurance. I went for 5 years without getting a mammogram. Finally, was able to get a mammogram through a community program. This is not how things would be at the country-based airport. The PDX is the best airport in the country. Those of us that do the work here should not live in poverty. And so we are asking your help for improve our wages, our benefits, because we don't have a vacation pay. We have a sick leave 5 days, and we don't have even parking free. We don't have many things that I think we deserve. Everybody, human being, deserve. And asking to the airlines to pay subcontractors like Hanley, Bags, and G2 enough so that they can pay us fairly, better wages. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. Loretta Smith?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Loretta Smith, and I'm really happy to be here today speaking in support of frontline workers here at Portland International Airport. As a former Multnomah County Commissioner, I spent 8 years championing policies that served as a safety net for low-income families and communities of color. From gains in equitable access to health care, to increased financial resources, to prevent homelessness. I went to work every day to ensure that people had a fighting chance to make it in this community. I am here today to implore you to do the same. Frontline workers who assist passengers to and from flights, cleaning planes, and cleaning the terminal are in need of your support today. These workers who make low wages also lack robust benefits, such as sufficient time off and affordable health care. While they deserve a living wage and robust benefits absent an emergency, the spread of COVID-19, also known as coronavirus, makes this commission's immediate and deliberate action all the more necessary. This story is not just a political story, national or global. It is personal for me. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my 2 beautiful granddaughters, is one of the workers people have gathered here to support today. She works tirelessly to ensure that she can provide for her children. My granddaughters need their mother healthy, and they need their mother taken care of by her employer so she can take care of them. Whether or not my granddaughters will get what they need depends on what you do here today. Many of you have committed portions of your lives to serving your community. So taking action today should not be a stretch for you. I am asking that you look into your hearts, see my granddaughter-in-law, others who have children, and the rest of the workers as you would see your own children and friends do the right thing for workers, their families, and our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all those who came and gave public comment today. It's important for us to hear from you directly, and I appreciate everybody also who came out to support the people who spoke today. Thank you for your feedback and your suggestions. I know that we've had a number of meetings and will continue to do so and take your suggestions seriously and analyze them as quickly as we can. We're also really, as noted, focused on COVID-19, and I know that we will have further time on the agenda today to talk about what we're doing to make sure that we minimize the effects here to the health of all the people who work at PDX. And I'll ask Curtis to, in particular, speak to that today. Thank you. We'll move on with the rest of the agenda. I'm going to actually call on Dan and Bobby to give us a COVID-19 update, please.
So, Commissioners, as noted, I'm going to ask Dan to start and start on the operational side. And maybe if in the course of your comments you seek to also address some of the concerns that we heard in public comment about employers on the airport site, that would be helpful, I think. And then Bobby will take the second crack at this on the side of our own employees and our own facilities here, separate from operational sites. So, Dan, will you start us off?
You bet. Good morning, Commissioners. It's been a busy couple weeks here trying to deal with the COVID-19 and a really rapidly evolving situation that has a lot of uncertainty to it. I'm going to give you kind of just a background on what kind of the situation is, how we're postured, and then we set kind of three primary goals for the port in responding to the COVID-19 threat, and I'll talk about some of our actions in those and some of our next steps that we're planning to do. First, about a week and a half ago, we established an emergency operations center. We call it virtual because it's set up on a more electronic basis as opposed to staff 24/7. And we deployed an electronic communication platform that a number of our businesses and certainly our federal partners have access to as well. So it improves information sharing quite a bit. And we probably will be in that posture for quite a while as we try to manage the evolving situation. We set three goals for the port when we think about this threat. The first, all of them are focused on port, tenant, worker safety, and also operational safety to make sure that when there are impacts that we're still operating our facilities safely from the operational perspective. The first goal was to deter the transmission of the virus within our facilities and amongst people that are using them. The second was to have effective communications with travelers, airport and port employees about the actions we're taking, recommended actions for tenants, for workers at port facilities, and how they can access additional information. And the third was to maintain business continuity and plan for that. I'd like to note that from the port's perspective, we are following the guidance and the cadence of the Multnomah County Health Department and the Oregon Health Authority. By extension, then the Center for Disease Control in the U.S. government. That is who we are using as experts to guide our actions and decisions. We have a lot of communication protocols in place. We're in daily situation reports with the state Oregon Health Authority and coordination calls as they schedule them. With Multnomah County, we're on daily briefing calls with a number of other jurisdictions and communities. Those happen every day at 3 o'clock. There's a daily situation report sent out and shared. And then they also sometimes sent emergency medical service guidance and updates for different protocols. We also have a lot of robust federal coordination. At PDX, it's primarily with the Customs and Border Protection and the Transportation Security Administration. And at the marine terminals, it's with the U.S. Coast Guard, which is leading the response for the foreign vessels, typically foreign vessels that are calling our facilities. We also participate in a lot of external communications as well. We sit in on the daily Seattle-Tacoma Airport briefing call. They're experiencing, obviously, a more severe situation than we are right this moment, and we're learning a lot from them. So we're partnering with some of our other airports. Washington County daily situation reports, the Northwest Health Preparedness Organization, and the Oregon Emergency Management Department as well. When we move into the goals, the first was, as you recall, to deter the transmission of the virus within our facilities, both at aviation and marine. Bobby will address kind of the port's corporate headquarters. We've done a number of measures. I think many of you have heard these on the news from a lot of different places, school districts, things like that. The first is that we switched the type of cleaning products used to a more hospital-grade disinfectant that also meets the EPA standards that have been sent out by the federal government. And of course, increasing the frequency of those cleanings, particularly to high-touch areas, floors, shuttle buses, pay stations, things like that. So everything people are touching, we're cleaning more and more often. And we're coordinating that with all of our tenants and concessionaires here as well, and asking them what they're doing and getting that information as well and making sure they're following the CDC guidelines. We've also, at the marine facilities, doing very similar things on the public areas, mainly where longshoremen come to work, and the port facilities themselves, and then the tenants are taking care of their own particular facilities. And we've also canceled a number of events here, including the Haneda launch celebration that was set for Tuesday, and the PDX Customer Service Awards dinner, which was set for Thursday, which is kind of a favorite from both the port and the airport workers. But in light of the social distancing, which Curtis mentioned earlier, it's just prudent to not have those large gatherings. We're also doing a number of activities and actual responses, really around the protocols for responding to an ill traveler or an ill worker at our facilities. And primarily the fire department here and the emergency medical technicians and how they respond, what protective equipment they're wearing, how they do an evaluation, how we segregate somebody who's not feeling well from general population and then transport them to medical facilities. So we're working quite a bit on that. We've also been asked several times to prepare for repatriation flights into PDX from different parts of the world or domestically by the federal government. We have not received any here, but we have developed plans for where we would house those planes when they came in, how we would manage the people coming off the plane and get them into transport to different places. And we've also been, of course, active in inventorying and ordering additional safety equipment needed, mainly in personal protective equipment. Our second goal of communicating effectively, I won't walk through, there's just a number of web pages that are available to the public on our public website, also to a PDX conditions page that's available to all of our tenants and employers and workers. Providing Oregon Restaurant Lodging Association guidance on the COVID-19, putting information in taxi and ground transportation hold lots for TNC drivers and things like that, and installing CDC and Oregon Health Centers for Disease Control and Oregon Health Authority public messaging, both on the public side of the terminal and on the worker side of the terminal for personal hygiene and good practice. So we're trying to get that information to everybody. And we've been moving this week to a more formal, focused, and detailed communication with our business partners at PDX to improve information sharing both on good practices, but also on business impacts, which I'll touch on in just a moment. We've done the same on the marine side with our tenants, but we're also participating with the U.S. Coast Guard on calls there, and we're also getting what's called a 96-hour advance notice of arrival for vessels calling. And with that information, we can do a risk assessment for each vessel calling on what interactions we need to have with the crew on a security perspective at the marine terminals. Maintaining business continuity. There's a lot going on and a lot of threat to transportation right now. We started with an operational risk assessment of port activities first to anticipate staffing, equipment, or facility unavailability due to sickness or quarantine of facilities, and looking at varying impact levels of like 25, 50, or 100% loss of capability, and making contingency plans for alternate facilities, different staff, or different equipment. We broke it at PDX into a couple of tiers. You know, a tier 1 facility for us is the communication center, police capability, fire and rescue capability, aviation maintenance, and then airport operations itself. Those functions, if we are not successful in having a backup plan or contingency, we can't run an airport. On a tier 2 side, security badging, aviation security, IT assistance, and the emergency operations center itself. Wouldn't be great if we lost those and we'd have to work around it, but not as critical as obviously not being able to run the airfield. And then there are many other services provided here, both by the port and by tenants and businesses that we have looked at as well. And on the marine side, it's mainly around our marine maintenance capability to take ships and cargo handling equipment, and on the marine security function itself. The economic impact is going to be big. We have a high level of uncertainty and it's rapidly changing. We don't know how long it's going to last. And we think there will be a long-term impact to business and leisure travel and cargo supply chains. We demonstrated a reduction in passengers at PDX of about 10% in this last week, and that's how fast it was. We were talking as a team about if we saw a 3% reduction to 5%, we should start thinking about things, and we saw 10% within a week, so it's happening quite rapidly. We are seeing some reductions in flight schedules. United Airlines for example, went from 20 daily departures to 16, and Sun Country has announced several routes that they will not fly right now. We do anticipate more reductions in flight schedules, although it's uncertain when those would happen. We are modeling for reduced employments and the impacts across different revenue streams, including parking, ground transportation, concessions, rental cars, airfield landing fees. So it's wide-reaching. Every passenger has a touch point to the financial format. We're also exploring potential port actions to reduce our expenses as we go through this time. And we're reaching out yesterday to PDX concessioners, offering operational flexibility and more clear and consistent employment information to provide mitigation opportunities for their business losses as well. We are very concerned about the workers here as well, and I think based on some of the comments, we'll reach out to some of the businesses. We certainly don't want people coming to work while they're not feeling well, and that's a priority to keep people safe. Next steps for us are to continue the close communications with the health authorities, the tenants. We also, as I mentioned, want to kind of understand some of the challenges that maybe people are having, and the businesses certainly are having, and want to partner with them to find ways to manage through this state-declared state of emergency. We'll also continue our contingency planning and preparedness for our operations, and then work to implement physical actions with better forecasting and maybe steps we can take to control expenses and weather the economic downturn that's going to come with this, as well as the health risk. Bobby?
So I'll focus a little bit on what we've been doing here to protect our HQ or headquarters staff. On March 2nd, so a week ago Monday, we stood up a cross-functional work team focused on prevention and preparedness for the HQ staff. That team meets weekly and is in coordination with the EOC on the operations side. The team is comprised of resources from HR, safety, legal, the EOC, communications, risk, and admin services. And we're really focused on three areas. One is prevention, preparedness, and what we're calling a first event. So around prevention, first we had relay resources, similar to what Dan was talking about. Relay resources come in and do a deep clean of the office using hospital-grade materials. We have required all international travel be approved or reviewed and approved by the executive director. On March 2nd, we sent a message to the staff, primarily focused on being proactive, wiping down their collaboratives, their desk space, using hand sanitizer, making sure people stay home if they're sick. We sent out proper hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. We also put signs in the restrooms that, some of the guidance is that you wash your hands for 20 seconds. So we put signs in the restroom that have songs that are 20 seconds long. Songs like Landslide by Fleetwood Mac, This Land Is Your Land by Woody Guthrie, Jolene by Dolly Parton, a variety of different genres so people can actually sing for 20 seconds while they're washing their hands. And we also sent guidance to staff on mask wearing, and that guidance was basically based off of CDC guidelines. On the preparedness side, on March 5th, we sent a notice to managers and supervisors suggesting that they review the business continuity plans to create emergency contact lists and to ensure that their staff has remote connectivity. Either they take a laptop home or they're able to dial in via VPN technology. We also asked them to inform us if they have employees that are traveling internationally. We would like to know when they're returning and what country they're coming from, and then we'll check with the CDC to see what level risk those countries are and determine how we might handle those employees returning to determine whether or not we feel they should be quarantined. We sent out instructions to managers about how to approach employees that might be demonstrating some COVID symptoms. And I think it's important at this juncture also to make sure that we're preventing any stigma or discrimination in the workplace around risk assessment and prevention. And as such, we're only using guidance around that we hear from the CDC and OHA. And then this Friday on March 13th, we'll hold a town hall. We want to make sure that employees understand all of the precautions that we're taking and answer any questions that they may have. And we're going to do that via live stream. The third focused area is around first event. So a first event could be if there's a school closure and a parent needs to stay home and take care of their children, if there's an employee exposure to COVID or an employee dependent exposure to COVID. So we've been looking at our time off and leave policies and determining what sort of provisions that we might make for employees should they need to use these leave policies. For example, we have a telecommuting policy, and that policy has verbiage in it that telecommuting is not to be used for daycare. And so we will be suspending that clause in that policy, understanding that some parents will have to take care of their children if schools close and the like. We're also looking at, if employees have exhausted their sick leave, we will provide them some sick leave in arrears so that they can make sure that, again, that they're staying home if they're not well. We're also providing guidance on expectations regarding working remotely. I think this is one of the things that I really want to make sure that there's a sense of urgency around at the port is that people are able to work remotely. So they are making sure that they either have a laptop or have the ability to use VPN technology. And then other things that that might be helpful for you to be aware of. We're doing an ongoing review of event participation and hosting. Dan mentioned a couple things where we pulled out of or we canceled the Henita launch party and the PDX appreciation event. We've also canceled Take Your Child to Work Day, which occurs on April 23rd. And before the Northwest Youth Career Fair was actually canceled, we were pulling out of that as well because we often have some of our first responders participating in that event. And then we're also partnering with our contingent workers, worker partners, to make sure that they understand what our prevention and precautionary measures are, and making sure that we're in close connection with them should we in a situation where we need to close facilities. And that is my report. For questions? Commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Nemi.
Thank you. It's very thorough, and I appreciate all the work that's going into all of those things. I think it was raised by some of the folks that gave testimony here earlier. A lot of the folks that are working on the PDX property in particular are working for subcontractors, the airline service providers. So, those folks clean the jetways, they clean the gates, they clean a lot of the airport lounges, in addition to the pushing the wheelchairs and possibly cleaning the wheelchairs if there's a protocol around that. So what is the port doing to look into and ensuring that those airline service providers are also following these kinds of protocols?
Thank you, Commissioner. We have direct contact with all those service providers and have checked with them and asked them if they are aware of and following the CDC guidelines for those. For airlines in particular, there's very specific guidelines provided by the CDC, and we've received an affirmative response from all of them. And we're coordinating with them also to make sure we don't have any, I'll call it, gaps in the protocols. So airline lease spaces, making sure that's cleaned at the same standard we're doing the rest of the terminal, that the jetways are done as well.
Go ahead.
And then I know you said that you don't want people coming to work at the airport sick. It is a reality that folks only have 5 days for the entire year, a lot of them. I was with one of our members over the weekend who was sick and choosing to come to work. because she couldn't afford to miss her paycheck. And so what is the port willing to do to make sure workers, if they stay home, are going to get paid?
Thank you. I heard the testimony, and I think we're going to reach out to those businesses and check in with them and see what they can do. I think this is extraordinary time. It's a state-declared state of emergency, and so I think like Bobby talked about port employees, we should be thinking a little bit outside the box, and we'll be connecting with them.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Just more a comment. Thank you for your diligence, and I know that clearly we heard from some frontline workers that are really playing a big role in keeping us safe. But I think as a commission, we need to look at this as not a short-term impact, but a much longer-term impact and disruption to our economic model and how people travel and whether they travel. I think much of how people and companies and institutions are evolving to react is probably not going to ever go back to the way it used to be. And as people adopt to more virtual ways of connecting, I think companies in particular will say, hey, maybe our people don't need to travel the way they used to travel. But I think for us, we need to look at the long-term implications to our economic modeling and what that means. Clearly, our fiscal year is kind of topped on its head, and that's not just us. That's for pretty much everyone. This is a major disruptive, force economically and how people live and how they communicate and connect. And I just think we need to look at it as something that's going to be disruptive for a long time, even if our greatest minds find a solution, a vaccination, a way to inoculate against it. I think for us, it's going to have a huge impact on just about every single aspect of operations, from security to travel to everything. I know I'm saying what you are aware of, but I just seen it and experiencing it from a company standpoint who has operations around the world, and just seeing how this has impacted different operations around the world. I think it ultimately comes home to impact us here, and I think first and foremost, knowing that we're doing everything conceivably possible to protect our employees from at every level of the operation, and understanding the importance of the roles they play. But the traveling public and our customers and our vendors and the obligation we have. But it's a major disruptive force, and I think even if the virus it comes and goes, I think it will have enduring impact on how we operate well into the future. And it's a comment. I think we'll start seeing large events just canceled, and things like Trailblazer games. And I'm not saying that they are, but I mean big events will start having an impact. And I think until we really understand more about the virus and the risk of exposure, I think it's going to continue to have very strong ripple effects. And I'm grateful to the efforts that the port is doing, to our frontline workers, some of whom we heard from this morning, the value of that work, and just the acknowledgement that we have to think about, every bit of forecasting we've done is now inaccurate and ineffective, and it's just been entirely disruptive from that standpoint. And so really just an acknowledgement and a comment, not really a question, but appreciation for the work. And I know we don't have all the answers, and as information gets better, we try to adapt and evolve immediately to accommodate. But I think first and foremost is the safety of the people who touch the port in every conceivable way. So just appreciation for that and the effort that's going into it.
Thank you. Commissioner Alexander.
Yeah, I also would echo many of the comments that have been shared. We are facing a number of unanticipated stressors that this situation has created, and it really has brought in a significant amount of disruption to what we had considered routine practices and policies. And we'll get through the disruption. But I think let's not lose sight of the opportunity that it creates for us to understand where we have space for improvement, because there will be a new normal. We will never go back to where we were before this happened. And I'm old enough to remember, my first trip to college, my parents escorted me onto the plane. No TSA, no nothing. Those days don't exist any longer. All right, now we've got a set of protections and expectations around what that travel experience will be, and they've become routinized for us now. We understand that there's a process that we will go through to access a flight. I think we also have the opportunity to look at where our systems, our contracts, our work with other organizations who provide services here allow us to raise the floor. So at the end of the day, once the crisis is behind us, we have the chance to look at what we can do to now set up systemic change that is much more reflective of the equitable ambitions and aspirations that we all hold. So I support the comments.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much. Dan, I think you have the next item for us.
Yeah, let's just go from COVID to climate change. Good morning. While the port has accomplished a lot when it comes to our environmental work, both the world and our knowledge of it is changing. And we need to respond and adjust our thinking and our decision-making accordingly when it comes to the world. We've been refining and honing in on a few key environmental priorities and developing programmatic strategies to address them. And we'd like to share that with you here today. And so to share that is Jen Bees, the Director of Environmental Operations.
Good morning, Commissioners. Excuse me, I'm not sick, I promise, it's allergies. So it's been a while since the last environmental update, so I'm really excited to share with you how our work is really evolving. I'm going to start with very brief historical perspective just for context, but the majority of today's presentation is really focused on a very high-level overview of our strategic priorities moving forward and kind of why we've honed in on a few priorities. Foreshadowing, some initiatives will require significant investment and will likely come back to this forum in the future for approval. Given this is really high level and a lot of content to cover, if there are aspects of the presentation you'd like to dig into more deeply, just let me know. I'm happy to come back anytime. So, thinking about the history of the port and our environmental work, it really started out with a purely regulatory compliance focus, and our environmental work was kind of siloed in different business lines. But starting 20 years ago, the port made a commitment to go above and beyond compliance with environmental investments and established formal policies and programs. Those are related to what we call media areas, natural resources, water quality, waste minimization, air quality, sustainability, energy. And so that took some time to really kind of get that imbued into the organization. The one port integration, where kind of everything came together at HQ, provided a great opportunity to standardize and streamline and really be more consistent about how we apply these programs and policies to our business decision making. We've done a ton of work already. We should be really proud of what we've achieved. And now, though, we're looking to really build on that foundation and push our work even further. So, 3 key strategic priorities that we're honing in on One is the concept of just prioritization. We want to narrow focus, move faster, and deliver more results as quickly as we can. Those are centered around air toxics and diesel emissions in particular. Those are our most significant environmental impacts that disproportionately affect lower income communities and communities of color. So we've been applying the equity lens to our analysis. This is a key piece of the puzzle. Urgent call for action around climate change and looking at what can we do to really help mitigate those impacts. And that's all centered around carbon emissions and our energy use. We've set really aspirational goals at PDX, which is amazing, and we're intent on achieving those. But a key piece of the puzzle is to look beyond just the port's work and think about non-port impacts that occur at PDX, and we'll provide more data and perspective on what in particular we're talking about there. So, why diesel at PDX? So in our region, diesel accounts for the majority of health impacts from air toxics overall. And when you look at this image here, there's a really tight concentration of particles close to the source, and then the wind picks it up and disperses it. So exposure time, proximity to the source really matters when it comes to looking at how much impact we have to people. And for diesel in particular, about a 1 mile radius is about where the highest impacts occur before it really starts dispersing. PDX runs continuous 24/7 operations. And we do Oregon Clean Fuels program. Basically, the state has a program where if you go above and beyond the fuel standards they're setting, you can receive credits to sell on the marketplace, which can offset upfront costs or maybe generate more revenue to invest in other projects. So continuing the focus on the equity perspective, this map comes from EPA's Environmental Justice Screening Tool, and it basically shows you, starting from red and going down the color gradient to gray, the populations that are most susceptible to pollution. And we've drawn the 1 mile radius boundary around PDX, again, for that diesel kind of sphere of most impact. And really the takeaway message here is we can't forget we have a community of workers that are in closest proximity to the source of diesel emissions for shifts at a time. So this is a human health risk component, but it really is an equity perspective too. Okay, so when you think about diesel, what are we going to do about that? The port, for our work, we've done a great job. We've reduced port-wide our diesel emissions by 67% since 2000. But when you look at PDX, that pie chart to the right, the blue is the port's contribution. The red is all non-port. 90% of that is from diesel ground support equipment. So we've really ramped up our engagement with airlines about electrification of that equipment. We're developing a really clear roadmap and strategy, and we're pushing ourselves to look beyond just our work. So on diesel, also construction equipment. Most diesel emissions in Portland Metro come from construction. Construction happens at PDX regularly. We're participating in a regional clean air construction standards program. That program is a phased emission reduction program, starting with lowering the idling and then moving to retrofits and replacement of diesel equipment to cleaner versions. We are currently implementing the 2020 diesel reduction phase. We're cost sharing the city's program administration. The key piece of this puzzle is to figure out how to not create a barrier for small business participation. A lot of the large construction shops are already retrofitting equipment. They can afford to do it. But smaller businesses, this is pretty pricey stuff. So we have to figure out maybe VW settlement funds. Are there other ways to really support smaller businesses in participating in this contracting program? Okay, shifting gears to climate change, I'm just going to cover a couple of key concepts. So this image here shows carbon footprint, and there's a number of things that contribute to your carbon footprint. A huge chunk of it is related to energy, and that's both stationary fuels, transportation fuels, and electricity use. When you think about carbon neutrality, you kind of have to either reduce your emissions and then maybe by taking carbon out of the atmosphere in equal measure, or you just eliminate your emissions completely, which is very challenging to do. So it just shows the interplay between energy and carbon here and how inextricably linked they are. The best practice when you're looking at carbon emissions really is working on your reductions first and reducing your energy consumption through energy efficiency, maybe on-site renewable energy generation, and then ideally very sparingly purchasing carbon offsets and renewable energy credits. The real work is just, let's just not emit as much carbon into the atmosphere. Let's see. I'm going to show you our goals in a second, and the carbon reduction goals is just, again, a reminder about how critical the energy piece of this is. So before I talk about our ambitious goals, I do want to really acknowledge what the port has achieved already, just for context. Between 1990 and 2017, the total numbers of passengers has increased by 162%. During that same time period, the amount of carbon emissions per passenger decreased by 55%. That's without the purchase of renewable energy credits, and that's mostly due to energy efficiency investments. We at PDX, Pacific Power is the utility electricity provider. They have 60% coal in their generation mix. So if you just think about if we reduce the amount of energy use, we actually reduce our carbon footprint significantly. So that's something to celebrate for sure. And in mid-2018, we set new goals for ourselves. We're pursuing carbon neutrality. This year, we're going to buy offsets, purchase renewable energy credits, and at the same time strive for these reductions in our actual emissions, these different threshold levels. I have a dashboard on the next slide, an eye chart really, that I'll walk through and tell you kind of how we're doing towards those goals. One of our other goals, net zero energy by 2040, that's where you produce as much energy as you use on site. We can do that. It might require significant investment in renewables, but we have some time to get there. The last thing we're doing, which is looking beyond just port work, is really the aircraft carbon emission reduction and sustainable aviation fuel blend. Timing is a challenge here because we don't currently have supply chain available. It's going to California currently. So that's just a nut we need to crack. We're still going to keep pushing and working with airlines to see what we can make available. Ready for the eye chart? Okay. So on the left-hand vertical side are carbon emissions. Along the bottom is time in years. These horizontal bands, the red and yellow lines, that's the reduction threshold. So red is the baseline, and the yellow lines are kind of the percent reductions below that baseline over time. We're showing the two different blues because that's Pacific Power's current mix, the light blue with the high coal generation. The darker blue shows their forecast for bringing more renewable energy online. We don't want to ignore their plans to clean up the grid, but we also have to look at just current state. Takeaway message here is we will not achieve our 2020 goal. The PDX expansion is phenomenal right now. That's not unreasonable, but we want to signal urgency. This is important work to do. 2025, we're looking pretty good, and I'll share a couple of projects we're doing that get us there. 2030, 2040 reduction thresholds, it's still a little early to say. We're looking good, especially with utilities cleanup plans, but we have time to come up with projects and initiatives and continue to push the envelope. Okay, so just like diesel, to put into context our emissions versus maybe airlines, the one on the left shows all of Port of Portland emissions. The blue is PDX in particular. And then when you put that in context of the non-port total, almost 90% of that orange slice of the pie is from aircraft emissions. Okay, so the next couple slides are really digging into, well, what are we doing related to the carbon and energy levers to actually achieve these goals? So around energy efficiency, great strides. We've reduced our energy consumption by almost 20% since 2011. We've been participating in Energy Trust of Oregon's Strategic Energy Management Program. That's when you have a building. It's kind of how you operate, maintain it, human behavior, how do you just really minimize your energy use. And we've been winning awards this year in particular. We just won 2 for both electricity and gas savings. Moving forward to push further, Energy Trust of Oregon also has a Path to Net Zero program where you enroll new construction projects. They pay you incentives to host design meetings with technical experts, and you really see how far you can go to bring your energy use down. Metering, Not really the most exciting topic, but really, really important to think about. How do we accurately track our energy use? How do we know the impact of changes we're making? And for clean fuel credits, you actually have to have metered data in order to receive credits. Okay, renewable energy. We have some on-site solar energy, pretty small scale today. T-cores, ground source heating and cooling is phenomenal. We're reducing the square footage by 50%. I mean, the energy per square foot in half. That's pretty amazing. We do purchase renewable energy credits where 100% of our electricity does come from renewable sources. But moving forward to kind of up our game a little bit, a lot actually, we're looking at community solar project, evaluating that. We're targeting 10 to 20 megawatts of on-site solar. We have a siting study in process that will be done in a couple months, and we'll have a better sense of how much could we actually develop around PDX. Ground and air transportation. So the cycle of moving away from conventional fossil fuels does have a couple of steps to get you towards electrification. Our parking shuttle buses, we've already gone from diesel to compressed natural gas. Now we're going to go to renewable natural gas. All of PDX for on and off-road equipment and generators is shifting to renewable diesel. Again, sustainable aviation fuel, the Oregon Clean Fuels Program just added that to their program in January of this year. We talked about ground support equipment as part of diesel, but there's a play here too on the carbon side. So we're getting ready. We've designed a couple of our concourses with enough power to accommodate charging. We've invested in electric vehicle charging stations. You'll hear more about some of the increases coming soon, but really we don't charge. That's not the right word to use. We do not have people pay to charge their vehicles. It's really about supporting employee and passenger choice. So, you know, we have our work cut out for us, but we have a really clear vision of where we want to go and how to get there. And I, for one, am really excited about seeing what we can achieve. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's a great report. Thanks for letting us know where we are. Any questions? Commissioner Hollering.
Just quick question: Do we catalog how our partners offset carbon and other sustainability efforts by the people we work with? For example, construction companies and the airlines all have their own efforts. So, are we kind of doubling up, and which is a good thing? And I mean, are we looking at that, or are we just looking at kind of our own footprint?
Yeah, we don't catalog what other people do. We do a pretty intensive inventory of our own work. We are aware of what our partners are doing. For example, Delta wanted to offset all of our employee travel, which we've been doing for years. So we coordinated with them to say, okay, great, you can do that. We still want the credit for being able to offset our travel. But, you know, so we have conversations about it. But that's a hugely complex, big world that I don't know that we could even access some of that information.
Madam President, this is Commissioner McDonald. I had a question.
Yes, please go ahead, Commissioner.
First of all, I wanted to thank you for the comprehensive update. I did have a question on the sustainable aviation fuel. And what do you see as the biggest technical challenge to making sustainable aviation fuel the fuel basically of choice or material of record?
Yeah. Well, first of all, supply chain availability in Oregon is the first step that just we have to figure out how to get supply here. As the cost differential is significant, and that's why I think Oregon Clean Fuels Program adding sustainable aviation fuel just this year is really helpful. It definitely can help kind of shave down that peak of cost increase up front. Storage and mixing, it's not really a huge issue. It's really just logistics. So I really think it's more about supply chain and just getting the product going and partnering with our airlines to figure out how to manage the cost implications.
Commissioner O'Halloran and Commissioner McDonald, Madam President, if I might sort of respond to both questions in a similar way. We look like we do a lot of things at these sort of concentric circles of control. and the center of control you heard a lot about, the things that we know that we own and operate, the things that we choose to pay for or not, we try to be aggressive as possible within our policies. So that includes choosing to pay extra to put a ground source heat pump in above and beyond what the standard might be. The next sort of concentric circle of control is our own contractors. Are there things that we can do to encourage good behavior? We don't tell them what equipment they can or can't use, but we, for example, in our selection process might highlight we'd prefer to see options that include lower diesel emission vehicles. And then the sort of the third and the last, the sort of partner circle, is more where we try to influence around policy, right? So we've advocated for a statewide cap and trade policy. We'd prefer a national or an international policy, but those are more out of our reach. And so as an example, this question about aviation fuels and sustainable aviation fuels, which Jen addressed, we don't really have the capacity to deliver those fuels ourselves or to force airlines to use them. But we do have some control over infrastructure where we can enable good choices, and we can work with them on a policy front to try to get more of that product into the market. We aren't buying it ourselves, so this is a decision they have to make. But I'd put that at the sort of the further out on the concentric circles. And to your question around, do we track that? In some cases we do, where it's our contractors are on our property, our direct contractors. We track more of that data, but mostly we track our own and try to influence where possible good behavior.
Commissioner Nemi.
I just have a question to that. So why are they using the fuels in California? What's different?
They have pretty aggressive financial incentives. So we have one plant in Southern Oregon, and all of that fuel is subscribed to California.
This is where a policy fix potentially could help change that market. It's out of our reach, but it's one that we'd support to enable that switch.
And we've been talking about just regionally, what is Port of Seattle doing? What are airlines interested in? I mean, I think there's more influence if we can band together and really have some potential demand lined up too, in addition to the financial incentives.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, I might back up just for a minute. So I think there's some fairly wide-reaching policy things we've talked about that are, I think, difficult. So the first thing is when I look at the safety net we have under, this goes back to the previous conversation, but it's related. Obviously, our safety net under the employees who touch someone in the process versus stay-at-home workers might be lacking. So if you've got to stay home, like we heard, with a loved one because they've got the virus, then that's a problem. We haven't figured out how to deal with that. There's other areas in that whole, and then likewise underneath our concessionaires and others who have their top line affected, which goes to the bottom line because we haven't figured out how to deal with that. When something, so do I think we're going to have another event? Yeah, we're going to have other events because we forgot about 9/11, we forgot about 2007, 2008. Now we've got this one. We'll get comfortable, there'll be another one. We ought to at least think about, we can't set up a safety net for everything, but we ought to be talking about how we adapt very, very quickly as an organization to something that surprises us. So then when we move on to this whole issue of, climate change and the carbon problem and what we do, I think when we start talking about compliance of our contractors with regulations that are not industry-wide. So, for example, it would be just here on the port. So an example would be, okay, you're going to come and work on the port as a contractor, but you have to have all electrical vehicles. That's going to fit really well with a very large organization that has the capital to be able to do that, but it's not going to treat our minority and smaller, women and minority-owned businesses very well because they can't afford that type of competition. So I think we have to not get involved in an area where we create unfair competition. I would like to say, and Dan and I have had this discussion here over the last month, it's kind of like, for me, it's a policy discussion about should we get credit in the emissions carbon deal for things that we are required to do. That's one area, required to do. So the government requires us to do it. I don't think we get credit for just compliance. That's kind of like complying with the speed limit. It's like you have to do it. I think so that's the first one. The other one is if there's an economic payoff, in other words, if we're going to change the light bulbs because it's going to save us money, I don't think we necessarily, as an organization, should get credit for those types of progressive things that just have an economic payoff. Likewise, grants. If we get a grant to do something, that's kind of something we're paid for. For me, the policy discussion is what is the port going to do that's above and beyond what's just generally required of airports and or businesses in Oregon. And I think if we're going to be a leader, then we need to decide what we can do that's above and beyond just those broad items. And I know Curtis and I have had that discussion, and Alice, a little bit, but I think the whole virus and this presentation just brings that back to me. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions, Commissioner Alexander?
Yeah, I'd also thank you for the comprehensive nature of the presentation. And clearly, this is work that the board has undertaken in earnest for some time. I'm curious as to whether the climate control executive order that the governor issued, I think there are probably things that reinforce the validity of the strategy that's in place here, but I'm curious as to whether there are areas that clearly are outliers to the work that's being done here now. Now, I understand it's a much longer time frame, and they're looking out over decades rather than the shorter period, but is there anything in those executive orders that would have you have to go back and sort of recalculate or reassess what we're doing?
Yeah, no, great question. Our goals are actually a little more ambitious than what the state set out. So for the further out goals, we're pushing for the same reduction thresholds, but sooner. And everything that was outlined as far as what the priorities are ultimately do support the work we want to do here. So I don't think we need to change our focus at all. It's really now just a matter of capitalizing on any and every opportunity to advance our work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great.
Very much.
Thanks very much.
I'll ask if any commissioner wants a presentation of the consent items. I'll read the titles. Designation of the Port of Portland's representative for Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District. Public Improvement Contract, Northwest Airfield Domestic Waterline Extension, Portland International Airport, and Public Improvement Contract, Airfield Pavement Seals, Hillsborough Airport. Okay. I'll call for motion and second then for approval of the consent items.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Stan Waters to introduce the first agenda item, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. This agenda item is a request for your approval of a construction contract to make stormwater improvements at our navigation base located at Swan Island. The navigation base is where we moor and maintain the Dredge Oregon and the other vessels and equipment associated with the dredging operation during the off-season. The reason for this is there were new stormwater requirements placed on our permit several years ago. We've been monitoring that, and as a result of that monitoring, we need to make a few storm water improvements at the navigation base in order to stay in compliance with our discharge permit. So with that, Marcel Hermans, our project manager for the project, is here to present the agenda item.
Yeah, thanks, Stan, and good morning. There we go. As Stan said, I'm here to request approval to award a... Okay, there we go. Stan said, I'm here to request approval to award a construction contract for the navigation-based stormwater treatment improvements project in the amount of $847,183. The navigation base is located at the Swan Island Industrial Park along the Willamette River. It is the home base for the Dredge Oregon and is used for storage, maintenance, and repair of their dredge plant and other equipment during the off-season. In 2017, DEQ implemented changes to stormwater permitting, which triggered a requirement for the port to obtain a stormwater permit for the navigation base. In order to meet the criteria of the newly required stormwater permit for this site, the port needs to construct a stormwater treatment system to assure stormwater runoff is clean enough. This project will install treatment devices and associated piping, pumps, and electrical, as well as new pavement on some portions of the site to help minimize soil particles getting into the storm sewer system. On this slide, you can see the project schedule. Upon your approval of this contract today, construction is scheduled to be performed from July through the end of October. Luckily, the typical summer construction season coincides with the Dredge Oregon's dredge season, which helps minimize any conflicts on the site while construction takes place. Shown on this slide, overall project budget is $1.6 million, which includes $167,000 of contingency. That is about 12% of project cost and reasonable given the risk profile of the project. McDonald Excavating is a DBE and MBE certified contractor, and because of that, we expect DBE usage percentage to be well over 80% on this project. And with that, staff recommends your approval of the Executive Director's recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm delighted to see the DBE and MBE certification of the contractor serving as the primary awardee. The last sentence threw me off. It lists that this is a minority contractor. Significant part of the work will add to the port's overall small business participation target. But the last sentence says, because of that, the port could not set a specific small business participation goal for the contract. My sense is that at 80% it would meet whatever goal was set, but was there a reason that there was not a goal set specifically? Given that the target, it could have been awarded to someone else. I mean, am I misinterpreting this last sentence?
It has to do with the fact that we do our dredging under the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's a federal contract, and under that contract, we're not allowed to set a goal. Oh.
So you're contractually prohibited from setting a goal?
From setting a goal, but we are still expected to achieve our goals that we internally have.
So it supported the overall got it? Yeah. All right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Can you help us to understand the contingency of $167,000? What are those risks that are we thinking that's budget for or planned for?
Yeah, the contingency is basically for any unforeseens. So in this case, some of the work is excavation. So we always anticipate some risk when we're doing excavation. You never know what you find once you're starting. There could be situations that are different, utilities that are in different locations, or changes we need to make in the field.
We have operated there for a very, very long time as an industrial site, so we could find some contaminants that we're going to have to deal with and things of that nature. That's possible.
So that means potential. Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be spent, Commissioner. So early on in the project phase, where there's a fair amount of risk, we'll start at a sort of 30 to 40% contingency, and by the time you're cracking pavement, you're down probably to 10 or so. So it shrinks over time, and ideally it goes back.
Perfect.
It's not spent on the project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Heller.
What are the consequences if we don't do this project?
We would be in non-compliance with DEQ permit requirements. We're required by the new stormwater permits to make improvements that can accomplish these goals.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'll call for motion and second to approve the executive directors. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Dan, you have our next item.
Good morning again, Commission. As you heard earlier from Jen Bees, our climate change strategy includes goals for significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. When compared to a gasoline-powered vehicle, each electric vehicle can eliminate an average of 4.6 metric tons of CO2, carbon dioxide, per year. And it's anticipated that electrical vehicle sales will continue to grow rapidly. And to encourage and adapt this transition to electric vehicles, the port currently has 69 electric vehicle charging stations that serves our fleet employees and customers. And this project will add 62 more electric vehicle charging stations with a primary focus on our customers and also for the first time our ground transportation service providers. And here to present the project is Alan DeKessian, Engineering Project Manager.
Thank you, Dan, and good morning, everybody. This agenda item requests your approval to award a public improvement or a construction contract to High Point Construction Services for the electric vehicle charging station addition in roughly the amount of $632,000. So the footprint of the project is pretty expansive. If you don't mind, I'll just kind of walk you through the locations and the changes. Starting in the P1 or the short-term garage, we installed 6 charging stations back in 2011. And they're almost fully utilized. Around the clock, you can go to level 4 where the charging stations are located and see they're all busy. So this project will add 4 new charging stations on level 4 and add an additional 14 on level 3. So 18 additional chargers in the short-term garage. There are 2 charging stations that are being removed from the valet area, parking area, so that reduces the net addition. You'll see in the various documents we have 62 new chargers total, but it's a net of 60 because of the 2 that we're taking out of valet. The P2 long-term garage currently doesn't have any electric charging stations, so this project adds 11 to the long-term garage. Moving to the taxi hold lot, and as Dan mentioned, bringing EV charging to our ground transportation partners. This is really exciting. To start the process of promoting electrification of the taxi fleet. So there are 5 chargers in the taxi hold lot. Back in 2016, we installed 24 charging stations in the red economy lot. This project adds 16 there. Again, back in 2016, we installed 18 in the Alderwood employee lot, and this project is adding 10 there. And then finally, at the fire station, we don't have any EV charging stations currently, so we're installing 2 there. So that's the footprint of the project. And this slide just basically recaps that, but it also mentions, you see in the bottom bullet, we're incorporating electrical submetering into the project. So as Jen Beese had mentioned earlier, submetering is critical when you're trying to account for your carbon footprint. You want to make sure that you're accounting for your carbon footprint for activities that you're generating and that you control, and you want to segregate the carbon footprint from the activities of others that may be happening on your property or in relation to your operations. So for example, employees who charge using our stations, that carbon associated with those kilowatt hours should belong to those employees and not to the port directly. So submetering is a big part of our activities with any energy efficiency project, in this case electrification. Pending your approval of the construction contract today, we anticipate all this work being done by the end of this September, so pretty rapid implementation. The total project budget is $960,000. Again, the construction contract going to High Point Construction is $632,000. It's very worth mentioning that High Point Construction is a small woman-owned business. In fact, they were not the lowest bidder on the project. The lowest bidder was unable to meet our 8% goal for small business participation. So we were very pleased that the second low bidder was High Point. They are currently wrapping up the new parking guidance system installation in the P1 garage. We have been having great experience with them. Renee Christensen is her name. So we're very pleased to have her on board. With that, we'll have a 47% contribution to total project budget to small business activity. We have $240,000 for port staff contracted services. That includes the design, which was performed in-house by our engineering team. Contingency of $88,000, which is 10% of the estimated costs. And again, total project budget $960,000. It will all be funded by the Port Cost Center. With that, staff requests your approval of the executive director's recommendations.
Thank you. Questions? Please, Commissioner.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner O'Halloran.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to have a question on every single agenda item, but on this, so if I'm doing the math correctly, roughly $15,000 per charging station.
Yeah.
62. And users do not have to pay to charge, correct?
Correct.
And do we know what it costs us annually for the electricity? Is that a big?
That's a great question. I haven't run that number, but it would be easy to do that. We pay about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, so I can run that number and get it back to you.
So I guess it's a heck of a benefit because you get, if you have an electric vehicle, it's a big incentive. You get.
I'm all for it. I think this is a great
I know
policy.
you get premier parking and you get the fuel.
You know, Commissioner O'Halloran, what we've talked about is, for the time being, we think it's de minimis. We actually are unable to track it until we get this metering in place. What the metering will also offer us is an option to later get back in and charge for it. In the meantime, we felt like this is part of the incentive. We're going to err on the side of supporting more electrification of automobile traffic rather than worry about can we recover some of that electricity. But in the long run, I think we imagine that we'll get to charging and metering.
And there's no restriction on long term. So some of these, if someone goes on a long trip, could they just leave their car plugged in perpetuity for the duration of their trip?
Yeah. We don't unplug them and move them. And I can't answer your question, by the way. We have 24,000 annual kilowatt hours estimated to be dispensed by the existing and the added chargers. So that's roughly $2,400 a year on our electric bill.
Yep. And until we're purchasing electricity that's from 100% renewable
Correct.
resources, we can't actually say it's carbon neutral because our sourcing isn't carbon, but it's a benefit and a contribution toward that. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Alexander.
Yeah, again, very helpful. I noticed that each of the venues are existing facilities. As we've sort of talked about construction of the Packer, the new location, are there stations outside of this number that are going to be a part of that construction? Are we incenting our rental car partners, to increase their fleets?
I'm not aware of any EV charging stations in those other projects, but maybe Curtis or Dan
Vince,
can
would you
answer
take that?
Yeah, we are including electric vehicle charging stations in both the parking portion of the rental cars, but also and the portion for the rental cars as well. So it is part of the scope of the construction project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for motion and second to approve the recommendation.
So moved.
All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Good morning. We're here again. George and I are do some more
contract amendments for the Terminal Core project. We were here last month and asked for some money for roof construction, about $70 million. We thought before we get too far into this next item, we'd back up a little bit and give a little more history about how we got here for the program itself, and then where we're headed as well. As you all know, the PDX Next capital program, it's these really, 4 or 5 really big projects. There's a lot of other projects that are involved in it. We're on track for the Concourse E extension project in June. We've completed the rental car quick turnaround area, and the parking additions project is still on track for November of 2021. The big one is obviously the Terminal Core, but we're managing all of these as one big program, and it's all designed, and these things come out of a master plan. Back in 2010, we completed our master plan, the Airport Futures program. We'll be doing an update to that master plan here in the next couple of years. And at that point in time, the first thing that came out of that master plan was really a review of our terminal area, because we looked at the facilities and the assets of the airport and saw that the terminal building was going to be the area that we were going to be most constrained in. The airport's a big system. It only works if all the pieces work. And so you've got to have parking, you've got to have the roadways that come in and out, you have to have gates, you have to have all the assets. The one that was going to be the most constrained was going to be the terminal building. And up here is the existing terminal building of how it looks and operates today. But these were the things that came out of the master plan and the terminal area study that we did, that we had wrong sizing of concessions in the wrong place. There just wasn't enough flexibility to be able to make changes in the building. The passenger processing models, right? This thing was built when the ticket counter was the most valuable piece of real estate, and it just isn't anymore as the airport is operating. And it certainly was put together when the passenger screening and security levels were significantly different compared to what they are today. And there was just also no room to expand those. So we really got into the Terminal Core project. And these are some of the overarching goals that we created to help us address all of those particular issues. First one is really one of the most important, which is the seismic resilience. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But we're trying to create more flow, more capacity, and more flexibility in the building itself. But how you do that with the existing structure is very complicated. So we're doing a number of different things, and certainly the roof is a big portion of that. So as we looked at the seismic resilience, one of the options that we considered was how could we retrofit the existing building in order to make it seismically resilient. And the reality is it was going to cost us hundreds of millions of dollars to shore up the existing columns and the basic structure. At the end of the day, then you really don't have anything other than a seismically resilient column, but we didn't add any capacity. So that's really what the roof brings into us, is a seismically resilient structure that'll be independent of the existing buildings, so that if and when there is a big event, the building will be protected as much as possible, and certainly from a life safety experience as well. So this was an early rendering here of what the new ticket lobby would look like. This adds the facility out into the alley where the security screening lanes will be. It's about double the size of the existing facility. And we've shown you this lobby, or this picture before. If you recall, the existing terminal building is actually 6 or 7 buildings that have been stitched together over various decades, actually, with varying codes. And some of them actually in the 1956 had almost virtually hardly any codes at that point in time into how it was constructed. So in order to really retrofit this building, it was just going to be ridiculously expensive to try and stitch all this together. That's how the roof kind of came together as the best solution to try to solve this. So just looking a little bit at the terminal core and the timeline that we've been under. So master plan back in 2010, we did the terminal area master plan in 2014. So we're 6 years into this. And the thing with master plans is that it takes the long view of passenger growth and the facilities that are going to be needed. So obviously we've been growing substantially up until obviously the last year or so, where it's been more flat, and we'll be down
this year. But we do look at it over the long haul that these facilities are going to be needed. How do we function? How do we operate? Those are all good questions, but again, these are designed for over the long haul. This building is designed to take us out into 2035. And so there obviously will be a decline here, but it will come back at some point in time. And we're looking at our past histories to see what's happened with certain events and how does that impact our growth and construction. As we look at where we're at on the design right now, we started in 2015, hired ZGF to be our architect. And we've been at it since then. We're at about, what would you say, George,
60% design.
50-60% design at this point in time. And the plan is it will be done in August of this year. And then the construction process is beginning this year with some column work, some enabling work in various parts of the building. And then certainly the bigger work starts out here in the next couple years. So we want to show you a little bit of some renderings, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about the roof construction and that process. So George has got some slides to walk you through that. It shows some of the complexity of it, but it really is a fundamental piece of the building because, one, it's going to be part of the design, but it's also, because of the resilient nature of it, a key component of it. And it's going to be complicated. And so you all approved the construction or some of the pre-design work for the fabrication area last time, but we want to show you how that's all going to come together and then get into some of the new changes that we're seeing here. So some renderings. This is a newer one this is what the facility will look like when it's all said and done. So you can see the roof constructed a lot more open light from what we currently have today. This is coming into the ticket lobby. And so this will be the ticket lobby entrance. So lots more open light. You can see the wood panels or ceiling that will be there, a lot more skylights that'll come through, and a much more open ticket lobby compared to what obviously that you see today. You'd also I note that the ticketing area, we're still working on the design there, is oriented different than how it is today, where there's a big wall basically. We'll be turning that wall the other direction, but we're working with the airlines to get their input as well into how they envision operating in the ticket lobby, but much more open, lighter, and airier. This right here is what we're calling the seam as you pass through the ticket lobby before you get into the security checkpoint area. This is where a lot of the concessions will be. What you're seeing in the back there is a 2-story restaurant that will be there pre-security. There will still be pre-security concessions, not as much as there is today, but still available for meeters and greeters and certainly employees as well. This is right at the point where you get to the security checkpoint. We have, again, this is where that restaurant will be. There'll be a central kind of a gathering spot, a place where people can meet as they're collecting themselves before they head security. We'll still have the north and the south security checkpoints. This is basically that area right here before you head one way or another, either north or south. And this is what it's shown to look like as you've come through the security checkpoint area, and you're now recollecting yourself and your belongings as you're ready to head down to the gate. You'll notice landscaping significantly more. Again, we're still working through a lot of the details, but this is the idea, much more open and natural light leading into the space. Ideally, it'll be much more intuitive to go where you need to get to at the end of the day. But this is kind of the highlights of where we're headed. George is going to talk now a little bit about the roof and the constructability of it and the complexity that'll be here and how long it's going to take us. And it's an interesting show, so I'm going to let George take it from here.
Thanks, Vince. So one of the things I want to also point out in these is there's very intuitive wayfinding. So as you remember the images early in the ticket lobby, the curves of the roof, whereas you walk from the front of the ticket lobby to the back of the ticket lobby. As you look at this, as you're walking out of security going to the concourses, again, the curves of the roof are the way you'll walk. And that'll tie in a little bit in my presentation as I talk about the constructability of the roof and why it's really in a couple of different sections. So last month, Commission approved the start of the prefabrication facility where we're going to construct the roof remotely from the terminal. And one of the comments we had from Commissioner Cooper-Comas was, with this 12,000-pound roof, how are we doing it in a safe manner? So we wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you about that. So this is an image of the terminal building, probably February of 2022. At this point, we've removed the old 1956 building. And one of the challenges we have, as Vince talked about, they're all different seismic codes. In order to remove that building, you have to remove the entire building. You can't take just portions of it, because then the rest of the building wouldn't have the stability to have an occupied space. So by April of 22, February of 22, it'll look like this. We would have demolished the old mezzanine, the roof of the existing building, as well as the areas where Concourse C and Concourse D, the western expansion, intersects it. The other thing I wanted to point out is the reuse of the Concourse Corridor connector. So by the end of this year, early next year, the Concourse Corridor connector will be eliminated. We will reuse the connector to connect passengers around the construction site. So both the Concourse C and Concourse D, and we'll have to extend it a little bit with some temporary construction. We'll be able to take the passengers around the construction site. Yeah, so here we come out at basically about where the Hollywood Theater area is today, go around the construction site, and then we're still debating whether to go in through the node or we go into where B1 is, and at the same side at D and goes in through the node areas. Now we will take the passengers outside of the construction site for the duration of the project. So starting about February of 22, we put a 300-foot crane out there to start lifting the columns into place. The Y columns that held up the roof girders. The columns weigh about 70 to 75,000 pounds each. And one of the things from a safety perspective is during the lifting of the columns or any components, we can have nobody occupying the space underneath in the event that there was some type of collapse or catastrophic failure. So during this operation, the picking up of the columns, nobody will be underneath, including not just passengers, but also any of our stakeholders in bag claim or in the areas below that. So for about 2 months, we really progressed with the crane to start putting the columns, the shoring towers, and just work our way through the terminal building, doing the columns in the middle of the terminal building. The first row of columns, the ones that are here, are basically kind of through the concessions in the backside of the Oregon Market. PAL Books area. And then these columns here go through where the Concourse Corridor connector is, which is why the Concourse Corridor connector needed to go away early. So starting about February of 21, we have prepared a logistics center, and the roof is then constructed in 3 sections. So as we talked about the orientation of the roof, there's the center section and then the 2 nodes. That'll start in February of 21, constructing it for about 14 months or so. And this is kind of an image of what the roof will look like about 10 foot off the ground. We're not showing the roof decking and the finishes. Those will all be installed. But the idea is we'll put the roof in place, do a lot of the roof decking on top of it, the drainage systems, the electrical, as much as we possibly can will be prefabbed in this area for cost effectiveness and efficiency. Then coming about April of 22, we start taking the room apart a little bit. So we'll take the middle section of the roof girders, the glulam beams out, leave the 2 big girders, steel 6 foot tall by 20 foot wide box girders that hold the roof up, as well as the glue lams that tie between those. We'll then lift the glue lam sections up, very similar to a tower crane So sections will slowly jack the roof up, slide a movement mechanism underneath it, and I'll show a little bit of picture of that. Pick the roof up and then take it over to the terminal. Here's an example of that. So this is Mahmood Industries, who's working with us on the project. They are very internationally known for moving heavy structures. Just recently moved the bridge at the International Rival Facilities up in SeaTac overnight, put that in. So they're very experienced. But they'll take this component over, and here's an example of it coming over through one night operation. We'll shut down some of the taxiways, bring it over the next night, set that section in place. It can be cantilevered over the section, so it slides over one night about halfway. It's locked down over the shoring towers. We figure it'll take about 3 to 4 hours to slide it into place. During this operation, nobody will be underneath it, so bag claim will be shut down, as well as the baggage handling system. Then the second night, move the rest of the place, and again, lock it into place so it's then seismically resilient. Then carefully place a couple of extra columns. Then bring, no, I'm not going to drop anything. Then bring the section that goes over Concourse D, and it takes about 2 weeks total, we figured, for each of these major sections to move and get into its permanent location. Move the same thing over Concourse C, and again, a 2-night operation. Move over Concourse D. Put the girder section at the end. You see how the roofs are sit in different orientations. So we then have to put the girder section at the end of Concourse D into place. Then start the middle section of the roof. The crane will then start building the penthouses as well as the mezzanines where over top of the security lane. So we'll take advantage of this opportunity. Move the middle section in the terminal into place, and this basically sits over top of the center section, or over top of the baggage handling system. So everything will be shut down in baggage handling system. And again, 2 nights of operations. Move the shoring towers over to the west side of the terminal building, or sorry, the far south side of the terminal building, and put the cranes in place, or the columns in place, and then do the area over the end of Concourse C. Put that girder into place. And then the wooden sections we pulled out, which sit inside the C section of the girders, we'll then bring those over and slide them into place within the sections of the girders that we already put into place. Then start putting the remainder of the columns into place, do the second section of the terminal building, and then all the work over the terminal building will be complete. Put the final columns, and then we start the western expansion. One of the differences of the western expansion is there's no stakeholders underneath it, so we can just put it into place over one day, and it can be done during the day rather than over the middle of the night. So work our way through the western expansion with the same type of approach, the 2 girder assemblies, and then the wooden system comes into place. Finish up the end of the penthouses, and from April of 22 to about August of 22, we should have the roofing system complete. We'll then enclose the outside of the roofing system with the curtain wall and start building the interior of the western expansion and the ticket lobby. Should take about 1.5 years. So the thought is by the end of 23, early 24, we've transitioned security into the western expansion. We can now vacate the existing nodes, and then we really do the same process on the existing nodes. So passengers still going around construction, and we demo the roof of the south node, and then do the same process. Put the columns into place, put the shoring tower in, bring the roof over, slide the roof over the location. Here, the coordination has to be even a little more detailed, because we also have passengers that will be going through the Concourse Corridor the new Concourse Corridor connector. So we got to make sure we've got planes coordinated if somebody comes in late at night, that the passengers can actually get to where we need them to get to. Do that section of the roof, and then again, just like before, the center section where just the wood girders are, we'll slide it into place. Then once we get the roof done on the south side, about a month later, we'll start on the north side. Same process goes on. So remove the roof, put in the columns, the shoring towers, take the roof girder assembly into place, slide it over a couple of nights, then bring the other section over. And this image kind of shows at the end, we do the curtain walls, but the curtain walls will come up to enclose the building early, especially on the western expansion. So by summer, May, June timeframe of 2025, we're complete. So now comes the mundane part of the presentation, which is asking for about $72 million to do some of the work. So we're asking today for 2 action items. One, to amend the personal service contract with ZGF for some construction administration services and other changes associated with the Packer Rental Car Center for about $1.2 million, as well as amendment to the Hoffman-Skanska contract for pre-purchase of all the piling that is going to go underneath those big roof columns, as well as the civil work scope, which takes all the utilities that are sitting within the footprint of the western expansion and moves those out into the alleyway so we can then build the western expansion. From an overall construction standpoint, I think I went through some of the schedules already. Concourse B, I want to kind of focus on, is in construction. It's in demolition. It's on schedule for a late spring of 21. We intend to start the western expansion, as Vince talked about, in June of this year when terminal balancing comes up, the Concourse E extension, and gets us the additional gate capacity that we'll be removing when we start doing some of the work in the alleyway. We'll be bringing some additional contract amendments over the next few months. Next month, we'll talk about some of the interim facilities, and that's some of the prep work to redo the ticketing and security, so we can do the demolition of the western expansion or the existing building. We then, June is a kind of a biggie for the building structure and some of the roof. There'll be some logistics work in August. The remainder of the demo and some of the mechanical and electrical work will come at the end of the year, and then next year will be the remainder of the contract. We're on budget for the $1.63 billion budget. Funding's through the Airline Cost Center. We're still meeting our participation goals for the construction side, and designs are trending a little bit under, but we think with some of this interim work, we'll be getting that up to the 10% goal. The ZGF contract amendment, with this amendment, will be a little over $123 million. The Hoffman-Skanska contract currently has been awarded at $200 million. Will be, with this amendment, $276 million. SAF recommends approval of the executive director's recommendation.
One of the pieces that I noted, and I appreciate you said it in your presentation about the fact that we're still on budget. I think because we've been doing these as bits as we go along, it's sort of hard to keep a good sense of where we are in comparison to where we should be. So thank you for providing that information. It's really important given the amount of money we're spending here.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Holleran.
Gulp. It is just a huge
Another
amount of money. I guess, and I know it's not new information to us, but it's more my question about how we remain America's best airport during all of this construction. And I mean, it is kind of tantamount to doing an oil change or changing your tires on your car while you're driving down the highway, because we can never like pause on the operation. But really, and I'm not looking for the specifics, but really it's got a huge component of the construction is how we make it not feel like people are just walking through massive construction in order to have an airport experience that we cherish. So, and I know that this is a huge part of the vision and consideration, but I'm asking just because I feel it would be amiss if I didn't.
Yeah, so that is actually some of the things we've been thinking about. Some of the phasing options you look at with demolishing the existing building. We're trying to make it as simple as possible for the passengers, so it'll look as permanent as it can. Now, we're going to have all that construction behind the wall, but basically the back wall of the ticket counters today will remain the back wall of the ticket counters, and it will close into throats, and we'll see all of that next month. We'll end up building new throats to go to security, but we'll try to keep that process for the passengers as smooth as we can. We know the demolition is going to be loud and noisy. We're doing everything we can to try to reduce the sound impacts of that, but that's probably where our biggest approach is. But then again, taking the passengers through the Concourse Corridor Connector rather than through a tunnel that is just 20 feet wide and full of sheetrock is some of the things we're looking at to try to do that.
I would just say it's a huge, right, we're focused on it. I mean, I hope it's some indication that the two people who know more about our operation than any others, Vince Granato and Darren Griffin, are now on the project. It's just this interface is going to be tough. And it's not just, I mean, it's first and foremost about safety, but it's about the people who work here. It's about people moving through. We're trying to be deliberative. I think you see that's part of why we want to keep coming back to you to say we're taking each of the steps. We're doing this right. We're still on schedule and on budget. To President Brooke-Holmes' comment, I mean, we're trying to do it right. We're trying also to learn, I'll say, from how other airports have not done it right, to try to sort of make sure we're catching the best and the worst practices and correcting as we go. But yeah, it's going to be a big deal for us, and it's 5 years. Right? It's going to be a big deal.
It's like a giant transformer project.
It's a really big project,
and probably a public works investment. I mean, probably the Fremont Bridge was for the first time you could see something like that, and maybe Tillicum Crossing. But this is for the region. It's a massive investment, and 1.6 billion is a huge chunk.
Yeah. And I'd really want to call out our communications team as well. They're doing a fantastic job, and we're looking at all the channels that we have available to us. So it's employees, it's the tenants, and the travelers. And we have a pretty aggressive program to make sure that folks know what's going on. And I think we're going to do it different than how other airports have done it, where lots of times you'll see a pardon the dust. And we're trying to be a little irreverent with our communications and certainly the frequency. We have websites and all of those channels, but they've done a great job, and maybe that's something we could also bring here and talk about the programs to see that. And we're trying to drive those things out as much as possible because George is right. The impact of the construction is going to be felt here for a long time, but I think if people know what to expect, it certainly makes that process a little easier, but it's still going to be a challenge for us.
Commissioner Alexander.
Thank you, Executive Director Robin Holt. I appreciate your remarks as well as the presentation for the pictorial walkthrough of the project milestones. I thought that was very helpful, and I'm glad to hear that we're still keeping the passenger experience during this construction phase in the forefront. I have a fairly simple request. As we go through these amendments, and this echoes on Madam President's comments as well, I wonder if we might just get a very simple running list of the amendments with an annotation of the date we made the decision to amend the contract, just so that we see the amendments discreetly, and you all do a very good job of showing us that detail. What I would like is, if possible, we could have a very simple running list of all the amendment decisions we've made throughout the project.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to do that. We'll just add it on to future items.
Put it in the written item.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Alexander.
Yeah, two things. One, I just want to reaffirm that the small business set aside remains consistent across the project, and I thought it was 20%.
Yes.
Okay. And then the other thing, I wanted to sort of co-sign on Vince's comment regarding the role that communications can play in this. I live in Selwood, and I watched the deconstruction and construction of the new bridge, which was a huge disruptor for the neighborhood. But what it also was an opportunity to see a marvelous feat of engineering. I mean, they moved that bridge. I mean, they essentially moved the bridge 40 yards over so they could build a new one. And I think letting the community sort of be a part of that experience as much as the disruption on traffic sort of just framed it a little differently. So I would hope that when we talk about this improvement, it's not just to the point of we're doing work, but you're watching the creation of this new space that's going to serve this community and others in a very extraordinary way. So I think that point is well taken.
Thank you.
Can I just make sure we get the answer properly here? But I don't think it's 20% across the project. It is for construction.
It's for construction for the Hoffman Skanska. 10% for the design side, 20% for the Hoffman Skanska. I thought you meant construction.
Good.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
Thank you. Any other commissioner?
I'd just like to add in, when we do construction, we can put temporary or very low-cost signage in multiple languages for passengers and employees that work here, just so they can get through more easily, and maybe have more volunteer partnership with the, customer service committee that have more volunteers available throughout.
Absolutely.
So, that's just one of the comments I'd like to add in. But
Absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any?
I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I'm like Commissioner O'Halloran. Do we ever do we ever take sort of the intellectual knowledge of this work and share it with local school systems? I mean, do we provide it as a way of reinforcing STEM education? I mean, there is a richness around this experience that it would be great if there was a downstream application that just allowed people to understand this and to see it in a way that is illustrative and educational.
Stan, we do have a partnership with some local schools through engineering, but not on the project per se. It's an interesting.
Not specific to this project, but we're actively engaged with Scott Elementary School right now through the In4All program that's in Portland, that basically takes a group like us. We send out a bunch of our engineers, and they get and teach STEM information, or provide STEM information to that school, where right now I think it's like, I'm trying to remember if it's like 7 fifth grade classes. It's something like that. We've gone twice. I think we have one more trip there, but it's through this In4All program that's really great. And they really kind of coordinate with us, and then we go into the school and provide the education to the students, and it's all about pushing STEM education. So we're quite active in that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That, Curtis, what?
Yeah, thank you. That's
yeah.
Okay, so moving from a $600,000 contract to a $72 million one. Call for a motion and second to approve the executive director's recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Good call.
Be on message there, my friend.